working with small businesses and startups. I have a master's in science and technology commercialization from UT. Worked for a number of years with their global commercialization group and doing technology assessments on overseas innovators. For the last 4 or so years, I've been working with the Texas State Small Business Development Center, where focus went from overseas entrepreneurs to entrepreneurs in the United States. And basically what happened is we had a massive budget cut last fall, and half of us got laid off, including me. So now I'm reestablishing myself into a consulting career, basically doing a lot of things that I've already been doing with other clients. So I'm a mentor with the Founders Institute. If I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, and I've been really enjoying that. And I knew Mike Millard, and he asked me to get involved with Mass Challenge as well, which I'm very happy to do. I think it's great. I think all this stuff is great. So basically, we were talking through kind of with some of the things that I've been doing, and I kind of been focusing in terms of people I work with on a couple of areas that I think is really important. And the title of my talk here is Let's Be Clear, Your Business, Think and Speak with Clarity. Because I don't know, some of you may be further along with your business or where you are, but I think that I find these to be 2 general areas where taking a step back sometimes and just making sure that have I thought through everything I need to think through? Are there gaps, in terms of my thinking processes? And then the second step, which is even if I got that down solid, can I communicate my message clearly? Because even if you have a great idea, if you can't communicate it in a way that people understand it, then great ideas can just go nowhere. So I think that these are just 2 general things that I think it's worthwhile to spend maybe 30, 45 minutes, just kind of talk through, and you guys can kind of self-assess where you are and think, are these some things that maybe it would help me in my time that I'm here at Mass Challenge to think through. So that's what we'll do today. I have a basic philosophy in terms of when you're trying to teach. I've done some teaching before, and basically my viewpoint is don't overload. Try to just be as simple and pragmatic as you can. And so that's what I hope we're going to do today. I think I'll try to get through this, as quickly as I can, but I'm not going to rush through it. But hopefully, a lot of this is not going to be rocket science. It's basically sitting down and basically taking a breath and think, do I have some gaps in my business model? Even if I don't have gaps, when I look at in terms of how I message, if you tried pitching before, did you struggle with it? When you were pitching before, have you been getting responses from people saying, I'm not getting this? If you have, then we can correct that. There's ways to correct that and make sure that you're better with that. So, basically, 2 objectives for today is this talk about and some handouts I've given you, some tools that I use that when I work with people to help make sure, are we clear? Have we thought through everything? Just think through some different things in terms of your business model, your strategy, making sure, first of all, have I thought through everything? Am I clear in my own mind? Or do I have some things I need to think about? The second half of what I want to do today is talk about your messaging in terms of, am I being clear, again, like I said, with how I communicate? Am I clear with with my website, is it clear? Is my marketing materials clear? When I sit down and just try to explain my company to somebody, do they get it? So the problem that I've found, because basically everybody, for your aspiration as you're looking to start a company, should be that what we just talked about should be that I'm totally clear on what I'm doing, and you know what, I figured out how to communicate this well. The problem that I found is that often founders have fragments. They have pieces of things, but things aren't totally built up in their minds yet. They have some gaps. A second problem is that I found that even if they are clear, they've gone through the first half of what we're doing, and they've done things pretty well. Sometimes I've found that, and I've sat through a lot of pitches, and this has nothing to do with the intelligence level of the founder, of the entrepreneur. It's just a matter that they just haven't figured out how to communicate it. So I found that even if they are clear in their mind, they're unclear with their words. And that's what we want to avoid. This is what we have here is because if you're doing this, then that means that people you're listening to, they're probably puzzled, they're not quite figuring it out, they're unsure in terms of how you can really help them, and that's what we want to avoid. What we want to move to is a point of clarity. And this is the aspiration for all of you, should be that no matter what you're doing, no matter what field it is that you have a clear picture of what you want to do, and you can convey that clearly to everybody. So I've given everybody about 4 handouts. The first one I like for you to look at is just what I call the startup canvas. And all of you probably has everybody seen the business model canvas or the value proposition canvas? I love those tools. They're great tools. What I've found is that sometimes, particularly with startups, when I'm talking with them, I found that there are some areas that they didn't go into that I wanted to spend some time in talking with my clients and in doing. So basically, I borrowed, stole, whatever word you want to say, some from other people. I added some things I wanted to add to it. And I came up with what I just call a startup canvas. And this is a tool that I find to be very effective as I sit down. If you'd say, hey, I'd like to talk to you, this would be a tool. One of the things that we've found, just from an educational standpoint, is that if you can visualize something, the reason I like all the canvases, business model canvas, value proposition canvas, why I like this, is that this is something that you can get your facts together, blow this up. I like doing it on a whiteboard. And what I found is that when you and your team get together, if you just talk about something around the table, you're talking about these ideas, you get one level of understanding. What educational research has shown is that if your team is actually all visualizing this together, it's on a piece of paper, it's on a whiteboard, whatever, but you're actually, as you're doing this, you're putting it in a context where you can visualize your thoughts, is that your creativity increases remarkably. And your comprehension of what you're getting really increases as well. So I present this to you as a tool. There's nothing magical about it. It's simply a tool that, along with the other canvases which you've already seen, I've found that this is something that, for the first part of our talk, in terms of making sure that we really have our thoughts together in terms of things, these are areas that I would like to walk through with any client of mine. And just and probe and push a little bit and figure out, okay, you say this, tell me why. So there's a lot of different ways we can delve into this, but having this, it gets into a lot of the categories I think we need to talk about. There are other categories. As I was looking at this morning, I was thinking, I don't have a category for team, and I think the team is really important. But I ran out of room, so I couldn't get it on that. That's something I also want to talk with, but all these are categories I think are extremely important. I'm not going to go into great detail on all these, but basically, look, it's customer segments, understanding your segment. What do they want? Understanding your customer's problems, your solution, the value proposition you bring, the unique advantage that you bring. That's something I think a lot of people miss, and I added this intentionally, was I think that a lot of times, particularly when we get to the second half of what we're going to talk about today with messaging, a lot of times I found a lot of companies, they forget to think through how they state, you as a customer, this is how your life is going to improve. That's a very powerful messaging tool. So that's something that when I sit down and talk to people with companies, I like to probe this and really just explore this area. Your customer profile, we'll talk about that in a minute. Another thing that I think you really need to do is that as you're going out and you're thinking about launching something, I'm a total believer in validation. I'm a total believer that you need to go out early, and that you need to go out and you need to talk to your market, and you need to validate that what you think is a problem, they agree with. You need to validate that what they say is keeping them up at night is what you want to develop. Okay? You can sit around, and then the only way you can find that out is that you have to talk to your customers. So I want to talk with my clients in terms of what are your validation metrics? What percentages are you looking for in terms of certain answers? How many have you gone out and talked with? And where are you with your validation? So this is a key area that I like to talk about with people. Your channels, how you're going to reach people. at least a basic bare bones in terms of what's your reachable market size and that you're trying to reach here. And then also, very important in terms of, let's talk about how you're going to generate revenue. And let's talk about, have you been creative enough with that? Do you have a one stream revenue stream that you're going to try to have a sustainable business on? That's pretty hard to do. When a brainstorm in terms of, are there other revenue streams in conjunction with what you're doing that you can do so that you're not dependent upon just one point of sale after point of sale after point of sale, and that's it. That gets pretty risky. You're totally dependent upon new customers at that point. So these are things that I think that if I sit down with a client and we can really exhaustively have this down where we can talk about it and it's really well thought out, then I feel like my client is really they're getting their focus there. There are other things we need to talk about, also we can dig into, but these are the types of things that, as you look at this, I think that I would ask you to ask yourself, do I have all these in line? Do all of these are all these together? So, where I think this can, I like doing this is that how I can take this then is that we can talk then in terms with, and you as a business then, you can use this in terms of thinking through and developing your business model. When you have this document, you can think through in terms of some aspects of your initial strategy, and as you build that up. This comes into play, and that this document right here, and we had a session at Founders Institute last night where they're doing pitches, and there's a lot of struggling right now, and some of it is that we need to be thinking through these aspects of it. We're not communicating this. So a lot of this, if you begin to put this together, you apply it to your pitches. You can apply this when you're talking to investors. You can apply this when you're talking to potential partners. This is basically where you're drawing a lot of your information for when you have this together. You apply this as you're developing your own messaging. I don't know how many of you right now already have maybe a marketing aspect with an individual who's a particular marketing person, but as you're developing your messaging, you're developing your marketing materials, I think that this is a huge resource. If you've done this, then this is where you're drawing a lot of that information from as you're doing that. So, and basically, there's one big thing with this. What I have found is that when I deal with a lot of launching entrepreneurs, is that the focus very often is on the technology. And I understand that, because you may have been working for years on your technology, so you're really wrapped up with that. And I found that when I sit down with a startup company, we can sit down and basically I can just shut up and they can talk for an hour about their technology. But what I want them to do and what I'm trying to do when I work with people is begin to get their focus off the technology and onto their customers. And that's what all of you really need to be at this point in time. If you're not customer focused now, you need to get customer focused. All right. So, your customers, just really simple again. This isn't rocket science here. Basically, specifically know who are they, and really what do they want. These are the types of just beginning questions you want to go to, but you need to be able to answer those, because I have found that sometimes people struggle, particularly with they can identify a segment, but when it really comes to what do they want, they struggle. They can tell me what they wanted to deliver to them, but they struggle with telling me what does your customer want. So that's an aspect we really want to work on. Next, we look at the customer profile. The second document that I gave, actually it's not the second, I also gave you a customer persona profile. How many of you have seen something like this before? A lot of you? Okay. This is something I put together. There's other customer personas or customer profiles out there. I was working a couple weeks ago at one of our Founders Institute sessions. We had a guy come in and talk to that group, and this is his area. He had his own. There's nothing magical about this. This is just something I put together. But basically what we're looking at is knowing your customers so well that we can begin to have conversations in terms of, tell me about your customer's environment. If it's a B2C, tell me about their home environment. If it's a B2B, tell me about their business environment. Tell me about their workflow. What do you know about that? Tell me what you know about your customer's behavior. What do you know about your customer buying patterns? What do you know about what is really the passion, the motivations, the goals of your customer? You need to identify that as you're developing your product and your marketing materials. Who are the influencers on your customers? Some general demographics, some general research. Basically, and I was talking, we had one of our guys last night talking to our Founders Institute group is a advertising marketing guy. He said that with his company, what a lot of their people like to do is they actually, as they're beginning to get their marketing and advertising materials together, they like to actually get an ideal customer and sit right in front of them, and they develop their materials as they're watching them because they're picturing the customer. They're right in front of them, and it helps them as they think through their messaging. So basically what I have here is just draw a picture or a photo of who you think your ideal customer is and write all of this to that specific person. And I think that can help you as you begin to focus that. And this is something that I've seen suggested before, and honestly, I've never worked with anybody that actually did this, but I think it'd be very helpful, and that is after you've done all that, then basically write a short paragraph in terms of, let me tell you, from what I know my customers so well, let me tell you about the day in the life of X, my customer. When you can do that, when you know your customer so well that you can actually basically tell a brief story, this is what their life is like, this is what their day in life has looked like. That means that you're messaging well, but also you're probably developing your product exactly to what they need. All right. With problems, this is a key area here. I really think that you need to really understand, focus on your customers, and again, what problems do your customers have? What are their needs and passions? How do they experience the problems, and why do they experience that? These are the types of questions that I want to work through with my clients, and making sure that we get beyond just saying here's a problem, but we understand the depth of the problem. That's where I think all of you need to get to in understanding that. And also with key problems, and some of you may be familiar with this, but there are different categories of problems. There are external problems, which are probably the first. Most of you, if I had you do an exercise right now, and you say write down the key problems that your customers face. More than likely, the type of problems I receive back are external, tangible type problems. And you need to do that, but you need to understand there are internal issues also that your clients have. And this is a key thing that I want to encourage. If there's there's going to be a few takeaways. I'd say that if you understand this, you take this away, then this time has been worthwhile. And that is understand that you need to delve into the internal problems. And the internal problems is basically this, is that they have external problems, great, but how does your external problems make your customers feel? And that's where understanding your customers really comes into play. And why that is really important is this. Companies tend to sell solutions to external problems. But people, your customers, they buy based upon their internal problems. They based upon that, yeah.
Can you give an example, please?
An external problem could be, just something that I need to get from one point in Austin to another point in Austin. I don't have a car. I need to figure out that's an external problem. Now, and that happens every day. Every day I don't have a car and I need to do that. I'm looking for a solution. Well, maybe somebody could come up with Uber or Lyft or something like that, a different way to approach that. The internal problem, though, that's the decision I have to make in terms of how am I going to get to work? If I'm taking the bus, is it going to be late? Am I going to get to work late? The internal is basically what is that causing me to feel inside? Because, and my basic point is that simply you either download this app, I'm going to start using the service, and as this one example, is because my frustration level is such that I want to resolve the internal problem. That's what makes me buy. And that's the main thing here, is that understand that what makes people buy is that internal feeling, the stress, the frustration they're feeling because of the external problem. That's what motivates them to buy. If you when we get to our marketing, if you speak strictly the external problems, your marketing is not going to be as effective as if you figured out the internal problems. And when you start speaking to people, you're speaking to their internal frustrations. You're talking about how you resolve that, because that's what they connect with. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, that's a really important point. That a key takeaway, one of them for today, will be that one. Value proposition, this isn't going to be a value proposition talk, because frankly that would take another hour, but basically a value proposition, if you're not familiar, or if you've heard the term but you're obviously wondering exactly what is basically it's where your company's product or services connect with your customers' needs. And what I generally find whenever I take somebody through a value proposition exercise, I'd say probably about 80% of the time what they give me are features of their technology. Features are not a value proposition, okay? Features are just features. What we're looking at with value proposition, it must focus closely on what your customer really wants, what your customer values. That's where you're connecting what you're offering to what your customer wants. A great value proposition is a statement that paints a clear picture of what your brand has to offer its customers. I'll say this, if you look at, you can Google examples of good value propositions, you come up with hundreds of them. What you'll generally find with those is that a great value proposition can be really short, okay? A sentence can be a great value proposition if you put it well. This is, again, it's getting to the heart of what your customer wants, and basically a great value proposition is going to basically, and included with that, you're saying how you solve a problem, what benefits the customer can expect, and you give them a reason to buy. That is a great value. If you can get that into 1 or 2 sentences, you've got a great value proposition. Okay, that's what we want to look at with that. And then again, how will their lives improve? And guys, I really think that I just want to emphasize this is really, and particularly when we get to the second half, which we're about through with the first half here. This is really going to be important. I'll explain that more, particularly when we get to the messaging, but thinking through how will your customers' lives improve is a really valuable exercise to do. Okay, your channels, real quick, is basically how are you going to get your product or service to your clients? If it's online, you've got an app, it's going to be online, that's great. There's web channels, there's physical channels, but just think through, and what I would do is we'll have conversations just in terms of understanding, digging into it, but it comes down to, and again, if you are, you need to do this for your model. If you're giving a pitch, every investor is going to want to know how you're going to reach your customers. So if you haven't done that yet, if you're preparing pitches in the future, if you don't have this down, you need to make sure you get that included in there. Who would be your key channel partners? Revenue streams, again, this is just, I can't talk about this before, is that you need to understand, everybody's going to want to know, okay, how do you make money? And hopefully you've thought through this to the extent that you can figure out multiple ways. One of the things that come in with revenue model with you is going to be, is with your revenue model, is your revenue model something which allows you to get money in early? Is with what your revenue model is something that you have to wait and actually produce something, and then if it's a bigger client you're trying to reach to, do you then have to wait for them maybe 30 or 45 days after delivery to actually pay you? There's a big difference with your revenue model. If you can figure out a way so you get at least half payment or some type of payment early, and you don't have to wait till 45, 60 days after you've actually done it, huge difference in terms of your cash flows and how successful you can be as a company. So there are just different issues with the revenue streams that we can think through and how we do that. I've got a variety of questions here. I'll just put them up here. I'm not going to bore you with going through all of these, but different types of questions you want to think through in terms of with your revenue streams and how you're doing that and creating that revenue model. So basically, this is the first half. This is basically, these are some tools one other thing actually that I want to make sure that I did is that I also gave you a handout called brainstorming questions. What I have found is that they're not inclusive, totally comprehensively inclusive, but I've found that these are great initial brainstorming questions. And actually, if you want to go through the exercise of building this, these are questions to ask yourself. And as you get your team together, and as your team then focus on these and begin to build basically your canvas in terms of making sure you have this. So these are just some basic tools. There's nothing magical about them, but I found that from the focusing standpoint, I found these just to be some effective tools. There may be some others that you've utilized, that you've worked with, and they work for you, keep on using them. But I found that sometimes people having some type of visual tool helps them, so everything pulled together. Now, what I would like to spend the second half on is basically how you talk to people. And this is really, really important thing, that even if you have half one down, you maybe look at me right now and say, Mike, I really have that pretty down. And some, I hope you do. That's great. If your response to me right now is that was good, is reinforcing things that I already knew, that's great. But this is a key second half in terms of your clarity. And that is, can you speak your business in a way that people understand it? And this is your messaging. Now, there's a couple things I just want to go, without going into much detail in terms of the brain, just a couple things to understand with the brain. Going back, thousands of years, the brain basically, its main function is this, and this is some brain people who have said this, is basically its main function is two things. One, it's to help you survive and thrive, okay? Going back thousands of years ago, for survive and thrive meant being able to see the environment and know what's a threat, what isn't a threat. If it is a threat, protect yourself, respond to that. We're really being keyed in terms of threats to my survival and being able to survive. So that is one of the key functions of the brain. A second thing for the brain in terms of doing this is the brain is actually burns more calories than any organ in your body. That brain is intense with burning calories. And in terms of surviving and thriving, another function of the brain is actually try to help conserve calories. Because if you get in this survival mode, if there's a threat, you need to have a lot of calories to burn. So actually what the brain does, it tries to help conserve calories so you can be ready to survive and thrive. Now, we're not here to understand the brain, but this has implications for marketing. This has implications for how you message your company. And when we look at that as this, so from surviving and thriving. So in the United States today, we don't have the dinosaurs running around, so we don't have, our survival and thriving is a little bit different, but it's still, there are still things where it comes in. Survive and thrive in a developed country could be the language of how you simplify a life. You're helping that person thrive and survive. Language talking about making more money is language which is focused on surviving and thriving to the brain. Language focused on meeting, there could be 200 of these. I'm just throwing some examples. But language, if meeting new friends and relationships in a developed society, this becomes something which helps me thrive. It's having a good network of friends. Language like this is directed toward surviving and thriving. Basically, it's anything that might increase that your customer's standing in the world for your target there. That is thriving language. That is the type of language that the brain will key in on and it will listen to. So you need to make sure, when you think through this, in terms of when you think about how you're messaging your company, are you using language which involves surviving and thriving of the individual? Burning calories. Processing incoming, here's the key point with your marketing. Processing incoming messaging, information, etc. Basically what it does, it requires your brain to burn calories. And so here's the key takeaway here. The more complicated your message is, the more calories your brain has to burn. Your brain doesn't want to burn calories, okay? So think through your website. And I've actually done this. When we look at a website, and we look at it, and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I don't get it. I got to think about this. It's causing my brain to burn calories. What's going to happen is that after your brain starts burning so many calories, it's going to start that random information the brain basically begins to ignore. Okay, if you're not having a compelling story that you're telling, we'll get to that in a second, but random information, basically, the brain just stops paying attention to. If we went out in the street right now and I had you face the building and say, just listen to what's behind you, there'd be a lot of random noises you hear. You might hear a car passing by. You might hear two people walking by having a conversation. There might be different noises that you hear. But generally, what the brain isn't going to really function to zero in on any of those. It's going to be something that's going to be forgettable. There's nothing there that the brain is hearing this survival and thrive, and it can connect together. However, if we put a a top hit of the day from the radio on right now, and you actually listen to something that was connected, the brain will focus in on that. It's a way for the brain to focus in something that's compelling. So that's an example just in terms of noise, where random noise, basically the brain is going to basically lose interest and stop paying attention to. Something that makes sense, it will listen to and pay attention to. Survival mechanism with your customer's brain, which basically is designed to tune out random or confusing information. So the basic point with this is that when you look at how you're messaging yourself, if it's confusing, if it's too complex, the basic moral of that story is your customers are going to tune out. Okay, they're not going to pay attention to that. Because the brain works this way, you must clearly and simply communicate how you help your customers survive and thrive. It's that simple. Basically, my messaging is that you need to make sure that you are communicating in a very simple, concise, and clear way. You need to be using short words. You need to be using short sentences. You need to be using short paragraphs if you use a paragraph. You need to be using a lot of bullet points because the brain can synthesize that. Okay, I've seen some websites where half the page is text. I promise you, nobody reads that. They won't. Okay, so think through all that. Most marketing doesn't work simply because of this. It's simply too complicated. If it doesn't work, then probably the root cause is going to be is that it was confusing, it was too complicated, and basically maybe a great product or a great service didn't get a new customer because we had this issue with it. Okay, processing information requires the brain to burn calories. People only listen to people and brands that communicate simply and clearly. I heard one guy that's a real guru in this area. He basically said he firmly believes this. He said people do not buy the best products. They buy the product they can understand. Okay, and I think that's an interesting point he made. As a founder of a business, I underline must. You got to make sure your company's not confusing people about your business. With your online presence, understand this, and some of you may already know this, people do not read online anymore. People are there's with the way that the online works today, people go to a site and they skim. What they're probably going to do is they're going to look at the top, they're probably going to say if it's a product, they're saying, okay, how much is this going to cost? Usually there's going to be at the bottom, so first thing they're going to do is quickly look at the top, and they're going to skim all the way down, find the bottom, and see if they can find anything about pricing. There may be some bullet points in there, those kind of skims they're doing. If there's nothing that's going to tell them certain key things, they're probably going to click away from your site. Okay, that's simply the way it works these days. If they don't see something helping them survive, they're going to move on. They're not going to spend time on your site. Here's another key takeaways. This simple. If you write nothing else down today, write this down. If you confuse, you're going to lose. Okay? That's a basic story. It's that simple. You got to make sure you're not confusing guys. It's probably the 20th time I've said that, and before I wrap up in about 5 minutes, I'll probably say it 10 times more. It's that simple, but guys, I mean, major companies today are still making the mistake is that if you go to their websites, a lot of them are still going to have confusing messages. In fact, really big companies have a real problem with this because they may have multiple lines in all this and they don't know how to basically structure it so they're communicating in a way that still makes sense to people. So this isn't just a problem for startups. This is a problem for any business, is that you got to make sure you're not confusing people. And understand this, I've read that basically people, every individual receives about 3,000 communication messages a day. They're just overloaded. We get bombarded with advertisements, with messages, with all this every day. And so basically keep in mind that your brain, that's going to overload it. We're going to go back to this again. That overloads the brain. That's why we go back to your brain is trying to filter through all that and say, does this help me survive and thrive? Is this vital to me? If it's not, it's gone. It's not going to focus on it. As a company's marketing its product, understand that noise is your enemy. You don't want your messaging to be noise. It has to make sense. It has to be simple. It's got to be clear. So, what I want to introduce to wrap this up is, just as we mentioned that with general noise, is that noise is something that's just random, the brain really doesn't connect with, but a song can be something that you'll remember for a long time because it makes sense. There is a way to combat noise. There is a way to actually develop your marketing materials, your messaging, in a way that makes sense to the brain, and that's through the basic idea of story. Story is something that basically, story organizes information in a way that people are compelled to listen. And basically, just as a song can be a sense-making in terms of for sounds, story is a sense-making device for the brain. Story is a way for the brain to put something together and have it make sense. So I want to introduce that. If you already have heard this, that is absolutely true. But if not, I want to introduce the idea to you guys that the way for you to develop more effective messaging is to think in terms of storytelling, because that's the way people can connect with. What we mean with story is this: story goes back thousands of years, and if you go back to the basic storytelling, if you look at it from 2,000 years ago, and you go to a movie today or read a book today, a good story, basically it's the same formula. If you go to a movie, basically there's the same formula for every movie that you go see. Good storytellers know the formula, and they basically tell a story around that formula. Good marketers, when you apply this to business, and that good marketing basically understands those elements of story, and they can apply those elements into your marketing materials, so that as your messaging, as your marketing, if there's a story in terms that you're telling about this, and going back to this, you have a customer is basically a character in a story. They have a problem. That's interesting. There's something, they want something. They can't get that. There's a problem that's keeping them from getting what they want. You have a solution. You got the components of a good story that if you tell it right, you have the components of a good story that you can tell with that. So what we have here is actually the beginnings of the way that you can message in a way that you tell a story instead of doing this. And this is a true story. When Steve Jobs, when they first they introduced their initial computer, Lisa, he introduced that to the world by taking out a 9-page ad in the New York Times, talking about all the features and talking about this. And if for those of you who've gone to the history of Steve Jobs, you know that early on, he did not make any money. Every company he was involved with was a big money loser. But he was doing all that stuff. And then he got involved with Pixar, and basically that was a company that had a great storytellers, and he learned a lot. And when he went back to Apple, and then they did their next introduction after he returned back to Apple, how did they introduce their next marketing campaign? They went from 9 pages, got people's attention, and people started paying in that. So basically, they simplified. They learned a basic aspect of how to get people's attention, and he went from a 9-page, feature-driven. He will tell you about all this technology stuff. Puts people to sleep. Okay. He got it to two words that were effective, that got people to pay attention, that got people to want to click and find out more. That's really important there. So, what you want to do with your story is a practical way you as a business owner can get your customers to see you, to hear you, to understand why should I engage with you. That's what you can get with story, and that's what you want to get with your messaging. In developing a story for your business, 3 things to keep in mind. And we're not going into the aspects of developing stories beyond what I can do today, but basically, what does your customer want? What's preventing them from getting what they want? And what will your customer's life look like when they get what they want? Those are all components to making a pretty interesting, compelling story that people will listen to, and they can put together in a comprehensive way. So those are the types of things you want to think about in your messaging. In developing your website, the 5-second test, and this is something you can do, or you can find somebody that's unbiased and say, hey, if you have a website, do a 5-second test. Have them go to your website and say you have 5 seconds. And in 5 seconds, can they say, what do you offer? How will it make my life better? and what do I need to do to buy it? And I would promise you that there are tons of businesses out there, established businesses, that if you do the 5-second test, they fail these miserably. It's not just startups. But this is a key guidance that I would suggest when you go with your websites, that you want to make sure that in 5 seconds, your website is so clear. I think you have an effective website. Now, you can scroll down, you can get into a lot of other stuff, but with the first, the above the fold, when they first look at it, it's got to be, guys, it's got to be simple, it's got to be clear, they got to get this. If they get this, they'll scroll down. If they don't get it, they may never scroll down, okay? I like this quote. Alfred Hitchcock, good big writers, from back in the 60s, said, a good story basically is life with the dull parts taken out. A good marketing campaign for you should be a good story of your company with all the dull parts taken out. Okay, that's what you want to do. Your messaging should focus. So, my suggestion is look at your marketing materials if you haven't already. Is the messaging you're communicating helping your customers understand how you help? This is a test for all your marketing materials, your website. If you're doing your pitch, are you also, are you simple and clear with that? Is your audience hearing what you have? And key principles. There are several key principles in messaging. I'm going to list a few here. And basically, agitating the customer's desire brings them into your story. This is a key principle here. And that is, when I say agitate, it's not manipulating. But you need to make sure that your messaging, we talked about the internal problem, the external problem. In your messaging, are you communicating in a way that that internal problem, you're pricking just a little bit? Because if you are, you're getting their attention. So that's a good thing. If you stop talking about your customer's pain, they stop listening to you. Okay, stay focused on your customer. Your customer needs this, an easy step-by-step plan to move forward, or they won't move forward. And this is something that kind of amazed me, but it's actually true, is that basically people need to be told how to do something. If you want them to engage with you as a business, you need to make sure that in your marketing, in your website, and your messaging, that you're very clearly, usually no more than 3 steps, you're saying this, to engage with us, this, and this, okay? You need to let them know. Because what we found is that if you don't tell somebody how to do something, they won't. Okay, so keep that in mind. And finally, unless you clearly call people to action, they won't take action. And this is another thing, and basically the call to action is simply you have a button on your website that says click here to buy. Some people get really shy about doing that, and guys, you can't be shy about the action from the call to action. You have to be very clear with that. Now, there can be different types of call to actions. Sometimes there can be what's called a transitional call to action, which is maybe they're not quite ready, particularly if you have something that's expensive. They may not be ready to buy the first time you see your site, but there's transitional calls to actions you can do. And there's a variety of different ones of those where you get them to at least opt in. They'll give you your email. Once they give you your email, now you can do email campaigns to them. We're providing them value, giving them more and more reason to trust you and say that, okay, this company, they really know what they're doing. They're helping me with this helpful information. When it comes time for them to buy, they'll think of you. So think about those things. Customer needs an easy step in, okay, the call to action. And so basically, that's what I wanted to cover today. So basically, our first half was some tools to help you think through just in terms of, do I have clarity in my thought processes? If you use these tools, great. If not, fine. But I think that these tools can be helpful, but go through that process in whatever way you can. And secondly, what I really want to harp on a lot today is that, guys, because there may be 15 people in here, there's probably 15 really great products here. But guys, if you can't come up with a way to clearly message what you're doing, then a great product can die an early death. Okay, so this is something you need to make sure that your messaging is the way that it's getting from here to here, and it's comprehensible. If you can do that, so basically, I don't know how many companies are here. I think 70-some companies are Mass Challenge. Basically, everybody here has an aspiration of being successful. Everybody here, your aspiration, where you're here right now, you're here because you want to be successful. And basically, these are two things that I want to talk about today because I think that these help you get to here. You know, what I hope is that Mass Challenge is going to be the largest group of high-fiving entrepreneurs in Texas, okay? That's our goal. This is where we want all of you to get to, okay? And there are other things you've got to do. You've got advisors and all that. I know that they're key. But the things that we talked about today, I think that they're just foundational keys. Everybody has to have these foundational keys in order to get to here, because this is where all of you want to get. We want to be high-fiving people, okay? So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I think that we took about 45 minutes. That's about what I was shooting for. My contact, basically, look, I do this for a living, okay? I hope this wasn't salesy, because I'm not trying here to just get business. I want to provide value for you guys. I hope this is value. What we can do as a follow-up is that if any of you would like to talk for an hour or so and maybe go a little bit deeper, contact me. I'd be glad to get together and we can just kind of discuss and maybe just helping you clear up something. And I'd be happy to do. I can spend an hour doing that, can help you maybe clear up something. If you think that you've got something maybe that you really need somebody to spend a little bit more time with, obviously, I mean, I've got the bank sends me a mortgage payment every month, or bill every month. So, guys, I mean, I have to charge. But if you really say that, we really need help with our messaging. That's a big weakness for us. We'd like to really get down, spend a few more hours, and talk about this. Let me know, and depending upon what we do, try to work something out. But if not, then I'd be happy to at least spend some time with you, arrange some. I probably would like to schedule something. I'd rather not just come down here and sit in an office 3 hours, have nobody come by. So I'd probably like to do it on a scheduled basis. But I'd be happy to talk with you. In fact, I'd be happy to learn more about what all your companies are and what you're doing. So whether you decide to engage with me or not personally, I wish you the best. I hope that there's some value. A few takeaways that we did today will be something that I promise you that when I said this is a takeaway, if you remember those points and you actually apply those points whether you talk with me or not, I think that your odds of being the high five group, I think they will improve. I think they really will. And so I hope that's of value to you. Got about maybe 5 minutes. If there are any questions, or if you'd rather just ask, I can stick around for about maybe 15 minutes. If anybody just wants to ask a one-on-one question, I'll stick around. Otherwise, you guys, you're busy, and I don't want to keep you any longer. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. I hope that there's some value with this. I hope it's something that basically, here's the way I look at any talk I go to, guys. If I get one thing that helps me go back and be better at something, I can't feel like it's worthwhile. I hope I had more than one. But if I had 0, then I apologize. But if I have at least one that you can take and go back to your team and say, hey, keep this in mind as we're moving forward, then I think is worth the 45 minutes. I hope there's more than one, but I hope there's at least one, and I hope it's something that, if it's something that adds a little bit that makes you successful, then I'm glad I was here. I'm glad we could do this. So, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Is this presentation about